with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by AM Woodland Outdoor Design, luxury outdoor living. amwoodland.com.
If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy and Peter Navarro went back on Fox for another contentious interview. Peter Navarro, of course, trade advisor to President Trump. And so last week it was Wallace. This week he didn't make Sunday. He only got to Saturday.
It's a Saturday.
What's that guy's name? Leland. What's his name? You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Saturday. Forget there was a little bit of contentiousness over the interview that the people are hyping. Who cares about that? Listen to what Navarro has to say. Let's focus in on that, because it seems to me that unfortunately Peter Navarro is winning the day with respect to Trump trade policy, particularly with the Chinese. Now, to be fair, Trump has been saying the things that he's doing now as president for 30 years. So I'm not feigning surprise, and I'm not solely blaming Peter Navarro. He's Trump's pick, and for reason. But I am focusing on the economics, and I do want the economy to grow, and I'm on President Trump's side for re-election. I wish he was more on his side when it comes to this topic. So this is an interview, by the way, it's Leland Vittert or something. Vitter. Yeah, whatever.
You're asking me to pronounce a name?
Yeah.
What's wrong with you? Have you fallen on your head?
So some of Peter Navarro's pronouncements that need to be dissected.
So there's no threat here.
You said there's serious consequences. What are the consequences?
For China? What's happening with China now, as we have methodically put tariffs on, as China has basically refused to negotiate in good faith. We've seen China lower their currency. Since the tariffs started, Leland, the Chinese yuan has gone down 12%, offsetting much of the tariffs that we impose, so China's bearing the burden. The other thing China does is lower their prices, so we've seen virtually no inflation.
And that means consumers aren't being hurt.
Are consumers hurt? Absolutely not. We have raised $35 billion worth of tariffs from the China tariffs. They've borne the entire burden. And by the way, we've had the backs of our farmers by using some of those tariff revenues to basically make those farmers whole when they're being attacked.
Right. It's a fascinating economic policy. We should do this in every industry, right? Tax away competition at the expense of consumers, and then subsidize them with the loss to consumers. Huh? How does that improve the quality of life for consumers, which is, by the way, what we should be focused on? It doesn't. I had a very spirited discussion with Steve Moore last week after Peter Navarro's interview with with Chris Wallace, where he wouldn't admit that consumers lose when taxes are imposed. This is a guy with a Harvard degree. I don't get it. For more on the topic, to help us get it, we're pleased to be joined by Don Boudreaux, economist, George Mason University, Mercatus Center, where he co-directs the program on the American economy and globalization. He's also a contributor to a blog I recommend, Cafe Hayek. Don, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Very happy to be here.
So let you respond to Peter Navarro, because I'm tired of doing so. So we've got two good things going on, or at least two good things going on, three good things. One, you have Chinese GDP cratering, so they're being hurt more than us, so that means they have to make a deal. This is the administration's line. Two is they're paying these billions of dollars in tariffs, which are redounding to prop up American farmers. And three is they've devalued their currency at a greater rate than our tariffs, thus nullifying any negative impacts of the tariffs on consumers.
Yeah, this is you did a great job, by the way, responding to him, but this is just demented economics. I mean, it's confusion from top to bottom. Where to start? Look, if it's true, it's not true, but if it were true that all the tariffs do is to cause the Chinese to lower their prices so that American consumers aren't hurt at all, then nothing is being done to ostensibly protect American industries, which is what the Trump administration claims to want to do. If Americans are paying no higher prices for Chinese imports, how is that causing American consumers to buy more American-produced products? In that case, it wouldn't be. But of course, prices are rising. This is documented in the research that the major effect of the tariffs is to raise prices that consumers pay. On the farmer issue, the Wall Street Journal just last week documented that the effect on the Treasury is negative. The amount that is taken in, I forget the exact numbers, but the amount that the tariffs have so far taken in for the U.S. Treasury have been swamped by the amount that the Treasury is paying out to farmers in order to persuade them to stop complaining about the tariffs. So these tariffs are negative for taxpayers, Americans taxpayers. These tariffs are negatives for Americans as consumers. We're paying higher prices because of the tariffs, and our taxes are being diverted to farm subsidies in order to reduce the political momentum to get rid of the tariffs. It's just bad economics all around. Navarro is, to say it politely, confused, but there's just no excusing it. Well, terrible economics.
Is he confused, or is it, or is he an ideologue? And so he and also he, much like Trump is an ideologue in this sense, I think he wants to take China out. And I think this is the way that he does it. So I don't think they're stupid or not even necessarily confused. I think they're ideological, and they perhaps have different ends, at least in the short term, than people who just want GDP growth want.
I was trying to be polite.
Okay.
You don't have to.
He does have, as you said, he has a PhD in economics from Harvard. If he really believes what he says, then he should go to Cambridge, Massachusetts right now and demand a full tuition refund because he wasn't educated. But for whatever reason, Navarro has this animus toward China. China does a lot of awful things. Lots of governments do lots of awful things. China even more so. But hurting American consumers is no means to correct that end. So the tariffs, no doubt, do impose some damage on the Chinese economy. But again, they also impose damage on the American economy. Having our trading partners, whether it's China or Chile, harmed does not do us any good. It only makes us worse. The global supply chains are being disrupted. Again, consumers' access to low-priced, high-quality consumer goods is being disrupted. No one is a winner in this except a handful of domestic firms that might get some protection, and these political ideologues who receive cheers from people who don't know any better, who think that America is somehow benefited just because the Chinese economy is suffering. But that's just not so.
Well, how are we using this to try to get them to stop stealing our intellectual property? Was that one of the main reasons for this?
That's one of the ostensible reasons. But on that issue, China has been a member of the WTO since 2001. The WTO has in place a well-regarded dispute resolution mechanism for handling intellectual property disputes. The Trump administration, last time I checked, which was just over a week ago, has so far brought a total of one such complaint to the World Trade Organization. China's record at adhering to WTO rulings is actually pretty good. And so the first place the Trump administration should go, if the main concern truly was to stop intellectual property theft, would be to take these complaints to the WTO. If the WTO then doesn't satisfy, we'll then pursue alternative means. But the very fact that the Trump administration not only doesn't do that, but is blocking the appointment to the WTO of judges, dispute resolvers, tells me that they aren't really interested in getting at the root of the problem. They're interested, they're ideologues, as you just said. They're interested in stirring up hostility to globalization in general and to trade with China in particular. And so as long as they can say, oh, look, they're stealing our intellectual property, then a lot of Americans will say, okay, well, do whatever you have to do, President Trump and Mr. Navarro. But I see no evidence that they are truly concerned, truly interested in reducing the theft of American intellectual property. I see a lot of evidence that they are truly interested in drumming up protectionist sentiment.
Well, but to be fair to the Trump administration, don't we have a problem with the Chinese, a fundamental problem that I assume they realize, which is that that the problem with trying to prevent the intellectual piracy is that you can't do a deal on that topic because intellectual piracy is central to their command control economy. They're not going to give that up no matter what document they sign, no matter what WTO ruling is handed down.
And I think that's an exaggeration. The Chinese are actually, I think they are the fourth largest payer internationally of royalties on intellectual property. I'm not saying they don't do any bad acts. Of course, they do. But what is central to Chinese economic success, to the extent that they have been economically successful over the years, has been their reliance on market forces. Now, market reforms have slowed down since President Xi took power. That is going to hurt the Chinese economy. It's not going to help the American economy, but it's going to hurt the Chinese economy. And one more thing about the intellectual property issue: a lot of the numbers that you see are exaggerated because they include what are called forced technology transfers.
Right.
These are when the government in Beijing tells a foreign company, look, you can operate in China, but on the condition that you divulge to us your intellectual property. And the companies then get to choose whether to do that or not. So that it's kind of a tax that Beijing puts on foreign companies to allow them access to the Chinese market. Now, I think this tax is bad. But I think it's bad mostly for the Chinese because it dissuades foreign companies from operating in China. It makes China less wealthy than it would otherwise be, in the same way that all taxes discourage productive activity. And so a lot of what's called theft is the voluntary choices of companies to go along with the conditions that the Beijing government puts on it. I don't approve of it, but it's not. A lot of this is not theft in the way most people think of it being theft. That people are sneaking in to the factory and stealing secrets, or people are logging in, gaining access to websites and stealing secrets. Some of that does go on, but a lot of it is this form of in-kind taxation.
The phrase trade deficits has recently left the president's lexicon, in part because the trade deficit has worsened under the tariff, so it's sort of going in the opposite direction as Trump said it would go with this tariff policy and this reckoning he's trying to bring with China. So that's one issue. But the larger issue is the question of whether trade deficits matter, and we should be particularly concerned about that. Isn't a trade deficit, couldn't it also be just called a goods surplus?
Yeah. In fact, that's what I like to call it. It's a goods surplus. That means we are getting from foreigners more goods than we are shipping to foreigners. Now, this is not really a deficit because what foreigners are also doing is investing in America. So every dollar that a foreigner gets when it sells us stuff, that foreigner doesn't use to buy our stuff, is a dollar that foreigner uses to invest in America. Buy stock on the New York Stock Exchange, which causes the share prices of the shares, the prices of the shares in our 401ks to be higher. They start businesses here in America. All of these things are good for the American economy, and so there's absolutely no reason to fear a trade deficit. Even worse is talking about a trade deficit with a particular country like China. There's no reason to think that in a world of 200 countries, which is our world today, that any pair of them will buy and sell to each other the same amounts. It's just but people demagogue that issue because the term trade deficit sounds bad. If they used your term, which is just as accurate, goods surplus, it would sound more optimistic. It wouldn't sound so bad. So you couldn't demagogue it. But you're exactly right. A trade deficit is a goods surplus.
Now, what do you say to those who are opponents of globalization, or maybe just have concerns about China? Maybe those concerns have been fanned a bit by this administration beyond, disproportionately. But they're worried about, look, we're in hock to China in terms of our debt, and so that is a national security issue. And also, when we're exporting manufacturing to China, as we had been doing up until recently, That's also a national security that compromises America as well. So there's additional concerns that need to be contemplated by a political leader than just the economic bottom line.
So I mean, there are national security concerns that do exist, but here are some facts. America's industrial capacity today, the ability of our factories to produce output, America's industrial capacity today is at an all-time high. And you never hear this from the administration because it's not useful for demagoguing trade issues. American manufacturing output is near an all-time high. When by the way, the question of us being in hock to the Chinese, we do owe the federal government owes the Chinese some money because the Chinese are among the purchasers of U.S. government bonds. But if we get into a war with China, it'd be very easy for the United States government just to default on those debts. So I don't see what leverage that gives the Chinese over Uncle Sam. But this broader point should be kept in mind. It's possible to identify an industry that is vital for national defense. And maybe you can carve out an exception to protect that industry from foreign competition in order to keep that industry's capacity and output high. But recognize this danger. When you protect an industry, you give it less incentive to innovate and to remain efficient. And so there's this trade-off. When we protect industries on national security grounds, we are reducing the economic incentives that the managers of those industries have to stay on top of things, to keep their costs as low as possible, to keep their products as modern as possible. And so that possibility has to be weighed against whatever benefit people might think they get from protecting the industry on national security grounds.
He is.